Lena Hawk, a widow of Apache descent, walked slowly across the barren, wind-swept plains of the American West. The dry earth beneath her boots seemed to echo the emptiness in her chest. The loss of her husband, Cade Ashford, had left a hole in her life that nothing could fill. Cade had been her rock, her love, and now, just 7 months after his death, Lena found herself struggling to survive in a world that seemed to have turned against her. The drought that had ravaged the land had also ravaged her heart. The crops they had relied on were gone, turned to dust under the relentless sun. The small garden behind their homestead, once bursting with life, had withered and died. With no way to feed her 2 children, Lena had been forced to sell what little they had left, the last of their possessions, Cade's pocket watch, her wedding band, and the small trinkets of their life together. Yet none of it had brought them any closer to surviving. Her children, Mirabelle, a 6-year-old girl with eyes as bright as the sky, and Cade West, her 4-year-old son, had not escaped the toll of hunger. Their cheeks, once rosy, were now hollow, their little bodies fragile from days without a proper meal. Every night, Lena would tuck them into bed with a promise she didn't know how to keep. "Tomorrow we'll have something to eat, I promise." But as the days passed, her promises grew emptier. She couldn't hide the truth from them forever. Her own strength was faltering, and the weight of keeping her family alive was becoming too much. With no other options, Lena knew she had to make a choice that tore at her soul. She had heard stories of a reverend in Sweetwater Junction, a man named Pastor Roy Evans, who sometimes found homes for children when their parents could no longer care for them. Lena hadn't wanted to believe she would have to ask someone else to take her children, but she saw no other way. She could not let them starve to death, not after everything they had been through. Sitting at the worn wooden table in their small, dimly lit cabin, Lena stared at the dying embers in the hearth. The warmth that once filled their home had long since faded, replaced by the coldness of a reality she couldn't escape. The faint smell of old smoke lingered in the air, and the silence of the house pressed down on her chest like a weight. She couldn't bring herself to look at Mirabelle and Cade, who were sitting on the floor playing with the few toys they had left. "Mama?" Mirabelle whispered, her small voice pulling Lena from her thoughts. "Mama, I'm hungry. When will we have food?" Lena forced a smile, her heart breaking with each word. "We'll have something soon, sweetheart," she said, though the words felt hollow on her tongue. She gently stroked her daughter's tangled hair, the soft curls that used to shine so brightly now dull from lack of care. "Don't worry, baby. We'll make it through." But even as she spoke those words, Lena knew they were empty. The hunger in her children's eyes, the way their bodies seemed to shrink with each passing day, was a constant reminder of how little she had left to offer them. The decision was made. Lena would go to Sweetwater Junction. She had to, for the sake of her children. She couldn't keep watching them suffer. And so she packed what little they had left in a small cloth sack, trying to remain hopeful, trying to hold on to some semblance of strength. But deep down, she knew. She knew that by walking into that town and asking for help, she was letting go of everything she had fought for. She was giving up on the dream of keeping her family together, of giving her children the life they deserved. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows over the dry plains, Lena took a deep breath. She glanced back at the small cabin they had built together, at the grave on the hillside where Cade now rested. The pain of his loss still ached, but there was no time for grief now. There was only the road ahead, a road she would have to walk alone. "Come on, kids," Lena said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're going on a journey. We're going to be okay." Mirabelle nodded, not fully understanding the gravity of the situation, but trusting her mother's words. Cade clung to her side, his small hand wrapped tightly around her finger as they stepped out into the harsh wilderness, the vast expanse of the plains stretching before them. It was a long and difficult journey. The sun beat down on them relentlessly as they made their way across the open land. By midday, Cade was exhausted, his boots worn thin from the miles of walking. Lena picked him up, carrying him in her arms as best as she could. The heat from the sun made her limbs heavy, but she pressed on, determined to reach Sweetwater Junction. With every step, the weight of what she was about to do grew heavier on her heart. It felt like she was walking away from everything: her home, her family, her past. But in her mind, there was only one thing that mattered: keeping her children safe, no matter the cost. As they trudged along, the sound of hooves reached Lena's ears, and she instinctively pulled her children closer to her side, her senses on high alert. In these parts, strangers often meant danger, and Lena wasn't about to trust anyone easily. She turned to see a figure emerging from the dust, riding a chestnut stallion. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, and looked like someone who had spent years in the saddle. He was a cowboy. His name was Wyatt Boone. As Lena Hawk trudged along the dry, cracked earth, the sun beating relentlessly on her back, the weight of the journey pressed heavily on her shoulders. She could feel the dust sticking to her skin, the air thick and dry as if the land itself was refusing to let her pass. Her children, Mirabelle and Cade West, were quiet now, too tired to speak, their steps dragging in the parched earth. Lena's own legs ached with each step, her body weary from the long journey ahead. She had promised herself that she would make it to Sweetwater Junction. But now, as the miles stretched on, the distance seemed endless. The exhaustion was creeping up on her, threatening to overtake her. She glanced at her children, their faces pale from the heat, their lips cracked and dry. "I'm sorry, my little ones," Lena whispered under her breath, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry I can't do more. We'll make it. I'll make sure we do." The thought of giving up her children to someone else, even someone kind, weighed on her heart. But she had to survive. She had to find a way. Her pride had already been stretched too far, and now, with nothing left but the clothes on their backs, she was left to wonder if she had any other choice. It was then, in the heat of the afternoon, that a shadow appeared on the horizon. At first it seemed like a mirage, a trick of the sun's glare, but as the figure drew closer, Lena realized it was a man, mounted on a horse, riding swiftly toward her. His silhouette against the sun was strong and imposing, a cowboy cut from the same hard land she was. The man's horse kicked up a cloud of dust as he approached, and Lena instinctively pulled Mirabelle and Cade closer to her side, her senses on high alert. In these parts, strangers often meant danger, and she wasn't ready to trust anyone. The cowboy slowed his horse as he reached them, stopping just a few paces away. "Ma'am," the cowboy said, tipping his hat. His voice was deep, steady, and had a calm authority that resonated with the experience of someone who had seen much. "Where are you headed?" Lena hesitated, unsure of how to respond. She didn't want to tell him too much, not knowing if she could trust him. But there was something about the man, his demeanor, the way he looked at her, that made her pause. "Sweetwater Junction," she replied quietly, her voice tinged with the weariness of the journey. "It's a fair piece away." The cowboy studied her for a long moment, his sharp eyes flicking from Lena to her children. His gaze softened as he took in their gaunt faces, the weariness in their eyes. For a brief moment, Lena thought he might just ride on, leave them to their own devices, but instead, he dismounted slowly, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. "I'm Wyatt Boone," he said, introducing himself. "I've been out this way for years, hauling cattle and working the land. Looks like you've got a long road ahead of you." Lena didn't know what to say. Her instinct was to refuse any help from this stranger. But the children were exhausted, and she knew they wouldn't last much longer under the sun. She couldn't do this alone. "Do you have any food?" she asked, her voice low. "We've got nothing left." Wyatt Boone didn't hesitate. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He held it out to her. "I've got some jerky and hardtack. It ain't much, but it'll keep you going for a bit." Lena took the package from him, her hands trembling slightly. She unwrapped it and saw the small, dry pieces of jerky and hardtack inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fill their bellies for a short while. Mirabelle and Cade eagerly devoured the food, their hunger evident in the way they ate, as if they hadn't had a proper meal in days. Wyatt Boone stood quietly by, watching them with a mixture of concern and quiet respect. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said after a moment. "And it's a dangerous stretch of land out here. What are you doing out here alone with 2 young ones?" Lena swallowed hard, knowing she couldn't hide the truth much longer. She looked into his eyes, steady and clear, and found herself telling him everything. "My husband passed away 7 months ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The drought took everything we had. Our crops, our cattle. There's nothing left for us here. I had to leave our home. I've been trying to get to Sweetwater Junction. They say Pastor Roy Evans can help find homes for children when their parents can't care for them. I didn't want to, but I don't know what else to do." Wyatt Boone listened without interrupting, his gaze never leaving hers. When she finished speaking, he nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "I know what it's like," he said quietly, his voice gruff with the weight of his own memories. "I've been through hard times myself. Lost my mother when I was a boy. The drought got her. My father had to give my little sister away to family back east. Never saw her again." Lena felt a pang of empathy for him, sensing the deep pain behind his words. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He gave her a small, tight smile. "We all got our stories. But you don't have to be alone out here. I've got a ranch up north, about 20 miles. Hank Callahan owns it. I work for him. He's looking for a cook and housekeeper, and he pays fair. There's a cabin for workers with families." Lena hesitated. She wanted to trust him, but the fear of being taken advantage of letting go of control, made her wary. "I can't cook fancy," she said, the doubt clear in her voice. "And these 2, they need watching. No ranch foreman wants a bunch of kids underfoot." Wyatt Boone looked down at the children, who were now resting against the saddle, their faces full and content for the first time in what felt like forever. He nodded, his expression kind. "Hank's different. He lost his wife last winter. The place could use some life, especially with kids around." Lena studied him for a long moment. There was something in his eyes, a sincerity that made her feel like she could trust him. She had no other options, and the journey had already taken too much from her. "Why would you help us?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "You don't even know us." Wyatt Boone smiled and nodded. "I've seen enough of this world to know that help don't come easy. But sometimes you do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. I reckon that's why." Lena looked at her children, their small forms curled up against each other, and made her decision. She would trust him. They would go to the ranch. "All right," she said, her voice stronger now. "We'll go with you." Wyatt Boone smiled and nodded. "Let's get you to safety then." He helped Lena and the children onto his horse, and together they set off toward Hank Callahan's ranch. As they rode, Wyatt Boone shared stories of life on the trail, of cattle drives and cold nights spent under the stars. Lena listened quietly, occasionally smiling at the lightness in his voice. She hadn't laughed in a long time, and it felt good to hear someone else's story for a change. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, they had reached the ranch, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt the smallest spark of hope. She didn't know what lay ahead, but at least for now, they were safe. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. As they rode together, the sun low in the sky, the evening light casting long shadows across the barren plains, Wyatt Boone stole glances at Lena Hawk. There was a quiet strength in the way she held herself, her back straight, her hands steady on the reins despite the obvious exhaustion. Yet there was something else, an unspoken sorrow that lingered in her eyes. He had been around enough people to know when pain ran deep, and Lena was no stranger to it. He hadn't pressed her for details earlier, but now, with the rhythm of the horse's gait and the sound of the wind in their ears, he decided it was time to ask. "Where are you from, Lena?" His voice was soft, the question casual, but there was an edge of concern behind it. Lena glanced at him briefly, then back to the horizon, as if the road ahead might offer her some relief. "I'm from Pennsylvania," she replied, her voice quiet like a breeze through the tall grass. "But I left when I married Cade." Wyatt nodded, understanding the weight of those words without needing to ask further. "Family not happy about the marriage?" he asked, his voice careful but direct. Lena sighed, a long, tired exhale that seemed to carry years of hidden sorrow with it. "My father didn't approve. He said Cade was beneath our station." Her voice hardened slightly, but there was no anger in it, only the dull ache of a decision made long ago. "I didn't care, not then. He was everything to me. But my family, they never forgave me." Wyatt's heart ached for her. He had heard of families torn apart by things like this, where love was seen as less important than tradition and status. He could feel the weight of her loneliness, the void left by those who should have stood by her side. And after Cade died, Lena continued, her eyes focused on nothing in particular. "There was no one. No one but the kids. My own family won't have us. They said it was too late, that I made my bed." Wyatt glanced at her, his eyes softening. "It's not your fault," he said quietly. "You did what you could, with what you had." Lena met his gaze then, her eyes meeting his with a mix of gratitude and sorrow. "I did, but sometimes it feels like it wasn't enough." Wyatt didn't know what to say to that. There was a lot he could say, a lot of comforting words he could offer, but he knew they wouldn't fix what was broken inside her. So, instead, he shared a piece of himself. "I lost my ma when I was young," he said, his voice distant as if the memory was still fresh, despite the years. "It was a drought year, much like this one. My pa couldn't keep up with 4 young ones, and he had to give my baby sister away to relatives. Never saw her again." Lena's breath caught in her throat, her heart aching for him. She had known loss, but to lose a child, one that had been taken away by circumstances, was a kind of heartbreak she couldn't imagine. She reached out a hand, her fingers brushing against his arm lightly. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but filled with sincerity. Wyatt gave a small, rueful smile. "You don't need to be. It was a long time ago, but it never leaves you. That kind of loss, it changes you, makes you realize how fragile everything really is." Lena nodded, her heart swelling with empathy. She could see the depth of his pain in the way his jaw tightened, in the way his eyes seemed to darken for a moment before he pushed it aside. They rode in silence for a while after that, the sound of the horses' hooves on the ground the only noise between them. But there was a sense of understanding now, something unspoken that bound them together in a way words couldn't quite capture. The sun was beginning to set when Wyatt finally spoke again. "There's a place up ahead, a ranch I work on," he said, his tone shifting back to practical. "It's not much, but it's a good place. Hank Callahan's ranch. He's been looking for someone to help around the house. Cooking, cleaning, that kind of thing. You could stay there, it's safe, and there's food." Lena didn't answer immediately. She looked over at her children, who had fallen into a peaceful, exhausted sleep against her, their small bodies curled up in the saddle. She knew this was the only chance they had. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her, but it was a weight she was willing to bear if it meant a chance for her children to have a future. "You'd be helping too," Wyatt added, breaking into her thoughts. "Hank's a good man. Lost his wife last winter, and the place needs a woman's touch. I reckon you'd be a good fit." Lena hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded. "We'll go." "Thank you, Wyatt." He gave her a small smile, and for the first time she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone. As they neared the ranch, the sky above them turned a deep shade of purple, the stars beginning to show themselves against the fading light of day. Wyatt Boone guided them into the yard of the ranch, and Lena felt a strange mix of relief and uncertainty wash over her. She had come a long way, through pain and loss, through fear and uncertainty. But now, standing before the ranch, it felt like a new chapter was about to begin. What lay ahead, she didn't know. But she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer walking this road alone. Sweetwater Junction was a small town, a quiet spot nestled in the rolling hills of the Wyoming plains. The town seemed like a distant dream to Lena Hawk, her tired body feeling the weight of every mile she had walked, every step she had taken toward the unknown. She could feel the dust of the trail still clinging to her skin, but now there was a new kind of hope rising within her. She could almost taste it, the promise of safety, of a future for her children. As she entered the church, the wooden door creaked under her touch. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged wood and the faint echo of distant prayers. Pastor Roy Evans, an older man with a kind face and deep lines carved from years of hard work, looked up from a small desk near the back. His eyes immediately softened as he saw Lena, his gaze flicking to her two children who clung to her side. Lena stepped inside, her boots tapping lightly on the worn floorboards, the sound almost too loud in the quiet space. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had been here before, standing in front of strangers, hoping for a glimmer of mercy. But this was different. This was the place she had come to seek help for her children, to find some semblance of hope in a world that had stripped it away. Pastor Roy Evans stood slowly, walking over to her with a solemn expression. He was tall, with graying hair and a broad, weathered face that spoke of many years spent working under the sun, much like Lena had. He offered her a seat, and she gratefully sank into it, her body heavy with exhaustion. "You've come a long way," Pastor Roy said gently, his voice like a balm to the rawness inside her. "What can I do for you, Miss Hawk?" Lena hesitated, looking down at her hands. She didn't want to speak the words, but she knew she had no choice. I need help," she began, her voice wavering slightly. "My children, they're starving. We've come so far, but we've nothing left. I heard you could help, find families to take children in when their parents can't care for them." Pastor Roy nodded, his face filled with understanding and sadness. "I see," he said softly. "It's not an easy thing, I'm afraid. These are hard times, Miss Hawk. There are few families here willing to take in children, The town's struggling just like you." Lena's heart sank. She had hoped, foolishly it seemed, that this place, this town, might be different, that someone might take pity on her children, on her. "I can't take them to a place where they'll be alone," she said, her voice hardening. "I won't let them suffer just because I can't feed them." Pastor Roy sighed deeply, sitting down across from her. His eyes were kind, but heavy with the burden of knowing just how hard life was on the frontier. "Helping others is a good thing, Miss Hawk," he said quietly. "But sometimes, help comes from the people you least expect." Lena's mind raced, the uncertainty of it all weighing on her. "What do you mean?" she asked again, her voice urgent. "Is he going to take my children? I won't." Pastor Roy held up a hand, his eyes softening. No, not like that," he said. "Wyatt Boone is a good man. He's been around these parts for years, working on ranches, helping folks in need. He's seen hardship, and he's lived through it. He understands what it's like to lose everything." Lena felt a pang of doubt in her chest. "He's a stranger," she said softly, looking away. "I can't just let my children go with him. I don't know him." "Wyatt's not like that," Pastor Roy said, his tone firm but kind. "He's a man of his word. He's been looking for someone to help on Hank Callahan's ranch, and Hank's a man who needs someone like you, someone to care for the place, cook, and help with the children. It's a hard life, but it's an honest one. And it's a chance for you to get back on your feet." Lena swallowed hard, her throat tight with emotion. She had come here for help, but she hadn't expected it to come from someone like Wyatt Boone. She had only just met him, and the thought of trusting him with her children felt like too much to bear. "How do I know I can trust him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Pastor Roy's eyes softened. "Because sometimes you have to trust people when there's no one else left to turn to. Wyatt has his own scars, Miss Hawk, but he's one of the few who understands what it means to fight for what's right." Lena swallowed hard, her heart torn. She had no other choice. She had to take a chance, for her children's sake. She couldn't keep them hungry and cold, hoping for a miracle that might never come. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady but heavy. "I'll go with him, but only because I have no other choice." Pastor Roy smiled gently. "That's the hardest part, isn't it? The choice to trust, even when you don't know what's ahead." Lena nodded, her heart a swirl of fear and hope. She had made the right decision, she told herself. She had to believe that. As she stood to leave, Pastor Roy stood with her, offering his hand. "Good luck, Miss Hawk," he said kindly. "And remember, sometimes help comes in the strangest of forms. Don't forget that." Lena shook his hand, her grip firm. "Thank you, Pastor. I won't forget." As she stepped outside into the fading light of the evening, the weight of her decision settled heavily on her shoulders. She had no idea what lay ahead, but she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't turn back now. She had to trust Wyatt Boone and hope that this new path would lead her to a better future for her children. She glanced back toward the church one last time, the faint glow of light spilling from the windows. And with a deep breath, she walked back to where Wyatt Boone waited, ready to begin the next chapter of their journey together. The days at Hank Callahan's ranch passed in a blur of hard work and quiet moments. Lena Hawk had quickly settled into her role as housekeeper and cook, finding comfort in the steady rhythm of daily chores. The ranch was a far cry from the life she had left behind, but there was something about the simplicity of it all that soothed her soul. The land stretched out before her like a vast canvas, and she could almost feel the weight of her past slowly lifting with every sunrise. Wyatt Boone was a constant presence at the ranch. He worked alongside her, fixing fences, mending roofs, and helping to care for the animals. They had formed a quiet camaraderie, the kind born out of shared hardship and mutual respect. His rough hands, calloused from years of hard labor, had become familiar to her, and with each passing day, Lena found herself looking at him differently. Not just as the man who had helped her when she was lost, but as someone she had come to rely on. Someone who had quietly become a part of her life. As the days turned into weeks, the bond between them deepened. They shared meals together in the small, humble kitchen, and in the evenings, when the work was done, they would sit by the fire, letting the warmth of the flames chase away the chill of the night. It was during one of these quiet nights, as a heavy rainstorm rolled in, that the distance between them began to shrink. Lena had been stirring a pot of stew, the savory scent filling the cabin, when Wyatt entered the room, his boots wet from the rain. He hung his coat by the door and sat down at the table, looking out the window at the storm raging outside. "Looks like it's going to be a long night," he said, his voice low and steady, as if he was used to the storms that came with life on the frontier. Lena nodded, her hands busy with the food. "The storm's been brewing all afternoon. I'm glad we're inside." Wyatt's gaze shifted to her, watching her work. The soft glow of the firelight cast flickering shadows on her face, and for a moment, he was lost in the sight of her. The way her brow furrowed in concentration, the way her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. He had grown to appreciate these small details, these fleeting moments that felt like home. "You've been doing a good job around here," Wyatt said after a pause, his voice carrying a note of sincerity. "The place feels different, feel warmer somehow." Lena looked up, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you," she said, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "It's just been a lot of work, that's all." "Well, you make it look easy," he replied, his tone softening. There was a pause, and then he leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on the table. "I can't tell you how much it means to me, what you've done here, what you've brought to this place." Lena felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but she quickly pushed it aside, unwilling to dwell on it. She had learned to guard her heart, to protect it from the kind of hurt that came with giving too much. But there was something in his gaze, something that made her wonder if she had been wrong to keep her distance. As the days passed, the storms outside became a metaphor for the storm raging inside her. She had never expected to find this kind of peace again, not after all the loss, the grief, the hardship. But with Wyatt Boone, there was something different, something that felt right, and as much as she fought it, she couldn't deny the pull between them. "Wyatt," she said softly, breaking the silence. "I don't know what to say." Wyatt straightened, his voice quieter now. "You don't have to say anything, Lena. I've been thinking, maybe we've both been carrying a lot for too long." He stood up and walked over to the fire, the light from the flames dancing across his face. "This place, this life, it's more than I ever thought I'd have. And it's because of you." Lena froze, her breath caught in her chest. She had known this day would come, the moment when she would have to confront her feelings for Wyatt. But she hadn't expected it to happen like this, not in the quiet of a stormy night, not with the flicker of firelight casting shadows across the room. "I can't," Lena started, but the words caught in her throat. "I can't make promises. I've been hurt before, and I can't risk that again." Wyatt stepped closer, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm not asking for promises, Lena. I'm just asking for a chance to build something real, something good. We both deserve that." For a long moment, Lena stood there, unsure of what to do. She could feel the weight of his words pressing against her heart, could feel the pull between them like a magnetic force. She had been afraid of this moment, afraid of letting herself believe that she could have something good again, something lasting. Finally, Lena nodded, her heart racing. "I want that too," she whispered, the words barely audible over the storm. "I want to believe it's possible." Wyatt smiled, a smile that reached his eyes and lit up his face. "Then let's start with tonight. Let's see where this path takes us. Together." As the storm raged outside, Lena took a deep breath and stepped closer to Wyatt. She felt his warmth, the steady rhythm of his breathing, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to feel the safety of his presence. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The winter winds howled through the open spaces of the Wyoming plains, sending waves of snow across the earth, blanketing everything in a layer of white. It was a harsh season, but it was also one of new beginnings. The air was crisp, and the evening sky was painted in shades of violet and gold as the sun dipped low behind the mountains. Wyatt Boone led Lena Hawk out into the yard one crisp afternoon, the snow crunching beneath their boots as they walked side by side toward the frozen creek that wound its way through the ranch. The wind had calmed for a moment, the only sound the gentle flow of the creek beneath the ice and the rustling of distant trees. The world around them was quiet, save for the soft whistle of the cold wind through the branches. It felt as though time itself had stopped for a moment. As they reached the edge of the creek, Wyatt turned to face her, his heart pounding in his chest. The last few months had been a whirlwind of change, of new life, and of discovering the love he hadn't known he had been searching for. But now, standing here with Lena, he realized that there was something he had to say, a truth that had been growing inside him since the day they met. "Lena," he began, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of everything he had been holding in. "I love you. I've loved you since the moment I saw you, and I can't imagine my life without you in it." Lena's heart stopped in her chest, and she took a step back, looking at him with wide eyes. She could feel the sting of emotions rising up in her throat, her chest tightening with a mix of surprise, disbelief, and something else. Something softer, warmer. She had never imagined that she would find love again, not after Cade. But here, with Wyatt, something had changed. Slowly, steadily, she had let herself feel again. She had let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, a second chance at happiness was possible. Wyatt stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I want us to be a family, Lena," he said, his words carrying the sincerity of a man who had come to understand the fragility of life. "I know it's been hard for you. I know you've been through more than anyone should have to bear, but I want to build something with you. I want to take care of you and the kids. I want to make this place home for us." Tears welled in Lena's eyes as she looked at him, the floodgates of emotion opening as the weight of his words settled over her. This wasn't just a man speaking out of impulse. This was a man who had seen pain, who understood the cost of love, and who still, despite it all, was willing to offer her his heart. She took a shaky breath, stepping closer to him, her heart racing. "I've spent so much of my life thinking I didn't deserve happiness," she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of everything she had kept buried. "But Cade, he wanted me to find it. He wanted me to find someone who would make me feel alive again." Wyatt reached out, taking her hands in his grip firm but gentle. "I can't replace Cade," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "But I can promise you that I'll never stop trying to make you feel like you matter. You and the kids mean everything to me." Lena nodded, her throat tight with emotion. She had never thought she would find someone who could make her feel this way again. Someone who could look past her past and see her for who she was now. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it. "Yes," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll marry you." Wyatt's face broke into a wide grin, the warmth of his smile lighting up his face. "I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of you, Lena Hawk." The world around them seemed to stand still as the snowflakes continued to fall softly around them, the sky fading into twilight. They stood there for a moment, just the two of them, their hearts beating in sync with the rhythm of the world. It was a moment of peace, of clarity, and of love that had finally found its way through the darkness. The days that followed were filled with preparations for their wedding. The small ranch was transformed into a place of celebration, as the people who had become their family gathered to witness the union of two souls who had both known hardship and loss, but had come together to create something new. On the morning of January 1st, 1874, the ranch was filled with the sound of laughter and music. The snow had stopped falling, leaving a pristine blanket of white across the land, and the sky above was clear and blue. Lena stood in the small cabin, her heart racing as she looked at herself in the mirror. She had never imagined herself in a wedding dress, never thought she would have a reason to dress up and celebrate. But today was different. Today was a new beginning. The ceremony was simple, but it was perfect. Pastor Roy Evans, who had been there to guide her when she had no one else, stood before them as they exchanged vows. Wyatt held her hands in his eyes filled with warmth and devotion, and for the first time in a long time, Lena felt truly at peace. As they exchanged their vows, Lena looked out at the small gathering. Mirabelle and Cade West stood by her side, their faces full of joy as they watched their mother find happiness again. Wyatt's smile never wavered, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart swell. "I do," she said softly, her voice steady as she looked into Wyatt's eyes. "I do, with all my heart." And when the ceremony was over, the small group gathered around them, their laughter and cheers filling the air as they celebrated the new life that had begun. It wasn't perfect, and it would never be without its struggles, but it was theirs. It was a family, a new beginning forged from the ashes of loss and pain. That evening, as the sun set on their wedding day, Wyatt and Lena stood together on the porch of the cabin, their hands intertwined. The stars began to shine above them, the vast expanse of the night sky spreading out like a canvas of possibility. "I never thought I'd find this," Lena said softly, looking up at the stars. "I never thought I'd find peace again." Wyatt squeezed her hand, his voice a whisper against the wind. "Sometimes the road to peace is long, but if you keep walking, you just might find it." And as they stood there, together at last, Lena knew that this was only the beginning. The life they had ahead of them was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. And for the first time in a long time, she felt the stirrings of hope. The hope that they could build something beautiful together.